Story number 1. Echoes in the Appalachians. I've always been drawn to the wilderness, the untouched expanses where nature reigns supreme and the chaos of modern life fades into a distant memory. When I decided to take a break from my hectic job as a photographer, the Appalachian Mountains seemed like the perfect escape. Little did I know, the serenity I sought was shadowed by a haunting legacy that would change my perception of the wild forever. The Appalachian Trail stretches endlessly, a serpentine ribbon of trails weaving through dense forests, rugged terrains, and picturesque valleys. I arrived in the small town of Pine Hollow on a chilly November afternoon, the kind where the first snowflakes of the season began to dance in the crisp air. The town was quaint, with wooden cabins and a close-knit community that welcomed me warmly. I rented a cabin on the outskirts, its rustic charm promising solitude and peace. My first few days were idyllic. I hiked through the trails, capturing the vibrant hues of autumn foliage and the serene beauty of snow-dusted landscapes. The nights were spent by the fireplace, reading books and savoring the tranquility that only the mountains could offer. However, as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, an unsettling feeling began to creep into my peaceful retreat. It started with whispers, a faint, almost imperceptible murmur that seemed to emanate from the depths of the forest. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my ears, or perhaps the rustling of wildlife preparing for winter. But the whispers persisted, growing slightly louder each night, intertwining with the howling wind and the crackling fire. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I decided to take a long hike deeper into the woods than usual. The trail was familiar, yet something about it felt different, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with snow, creating an almost impenetrable canopy above. As night began to fall, the temperature dropped rapidly, quickened my pace, eager to reach the safety of my cabin before darkness fully enveloped the forest. That's when I heard it, the distinct sound of footsteps crunching in the snow, echoing through the stillness. My heart raced as I glanced around, trying to locate the source of the noise. The footsteps seemed to follow me, each step mirroring my own. I broke into a run, the path becoming a blur as panic set in. The footsteps accelerated, matching my frantic pace. My breaths came in short gasps, visible in the frigid air, as I pushed myself harder, desperate to escape whatever or whoever was pursuing me. Suddenly, the trail ended abruptly at the edge of a frozen pond, the ice thick and unyielding. I turned to confront my pursuer, but there was no one there, just the frozen expanse and the swirling snowstorm that had sprung up out of nowhere. Shivering uncontrollably, I forced myself to retrace my steps, each step feeling heavier than the last. The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by faint cries that sent chills down my spine. Back at the cabin, I tried to calm my racing heart, but sleep eluded me. The whispers and cries seemed to seep through the walls, a constant reminder of the night's terror. The next morning, I sought answers at the local library, determined to understand what had been haunting me. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, listened intently as I recounted my experience. Her eyes grew distant as she pulled out old newspaper clippings and photographs. "You're talking about the lost hunters of Pine Hollow," she said quietly. "Over 50 years ago, during one of the harshest winters on record, a group of hunters went missing in a snowstorm. They never returned, and their bodies were never found. Locals believe their souls still roam these mountains, reliving their final moments." She handed me a faded photograph of the hunters, 5 men, sturdy and rugged, their faces etched with determination and camaraderie. They were experienced, but the storm was merciless. Some say you can still hear their footsteps and see their ghostly figures around the old hunting grounds. Intrigued and unsettled, I delved deeper into the history. The stories were consistent, reports of unexplained footsteps, flickering campfires, and ghostly apparitions in the dead of winter. The most common sighting was the headless hunter, a figure holding a lantern, eternally searching for something lost in the blizzard. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to visit the old hunting grounds, now a desolate area known as Echo Ridge. Armed with my camera, recorder, and a flashlight, I set out on a clear December night, the moon casting an eerie glow over the snow-covered landscape. The path to Echo Ridge was treacherous, the snow still falling gently, creating a blanket of silence that was both beautiful and foreboding. As I approached the ridge, the air grew colder, and the whispers from before seemed to intensify, swirling around me like a spectral wind. I set up my equipment near an old, abandoned campsite, the remnants of tents and broken gear a stark reminder of the hunter's fate. The night was still, the only sound being the soft fall of snow and the distant howl of a lone wolf. I waited, hoping to capture any paranormal activity on film. But hours passed with nothing more than the occasional creak of trees and the whispering wind. Just as I was about to give up, a flicker of light appeared in the distance. A campfire, small and flickering, moving slowly through the trees. My heart raced as I realized it was a group of figures, moving with purpose through the snow. I grabbed my camera, aiming to capture the apparition. But before I could press the shutter, a piercing scream echoed through the night, freezing me in place. The figures halted, turning towards me. One of them stepped forward, revealing the haunting visage of the headless hunter. His eyes burned with an otherworldly light, and his hollow sockets seemed to pierce through my very soul. In his hand, he held a lantern that cast an eerie glow, illuminating his empty neck where his head should have been. "Why do you disturb our eternal search?" His voice was a hollow echo, carried by the wind. I stammered, unable to find my voice. As the weight of the moment pressed down on me, the whispers intensified, merging with his words, a chorus of lost souls seeking closure. I'm sorry," I managed to whisper. "I didn't mean to intrude." The headless hunter's gaze softened, a hint of sorrow in his ethereal eyes. "Help us find peace. Our search has been endless, our torment unending." Determined to assist these restless spirits, I asked, "What can I do to help?" The hunter pointed towards the dense forest, where the snowstorm had claimed their lives. "Retrieve what was lost. Only then can our souls be freed from this eternal winter." With a mix of fear and resolve, I vowed to help them, knowing that my journey into the heart of the Appalachians had become much more than a quest for solitude. It was a mission to bring peace to the lost souls of Echo Ridge. The following days were a blur of research and preparation. I learned that the hunters had been searching for a rare medicinal herb believed to thrive only in the most remote parts of the mountains. According to legend, this herb had the power to heal and protect, a vital resource during the economic hardships of the Great Depression. Armed with this knowledge, I ventured deeper into the wilderness, following old trails and markers left by the hunters. The weather was unforgiving, with biting winds and relentless snowstorms that tested my endurance. Each night, I camped under the stars, keeping vigil near the old hunting grounds, hoping for another encounter. One evening, as I set up camp, the whispers returned, now more urgent and pleading. The flickering light of a campfire appeared once again, this time accompanied by the sound of muffled voices. I followed the sound, navigating through the thick snow until I reached a secluded clearing. There, amidst the swirling snow, stood the headless hunter, his lantern casting long shadows on the ground. Surrounding him were the other hunters, their ghostly forms moving with a silent desperation. "I found the herb," one of them whispered, holding out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The headless hunter accepted it, a look of hope replacing his earlier sorrow. But just as peace seemed within reach, the storm intensified, the winds howling like the tortured souls themselves. The ground beneath our feet trembled, and the lantern's light flickered ominously. The hunters began to fade, their forms dissolving into the snowstorm, leaving only the headless hunter behind. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the tempest. "Now, we can rest." With those final words, he vanished, leaving me alone in the clearing. The storm began to calm, the snow settling softly around me as if the mountains themselves had sighed in relief. I knew that I had fulfilled my promise, helping the lost souls find the peace they had sought for decades. Returning to Pine Hollow, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and a deep connection to the Appalachian Mountains. The legend of the Lost Hunters had been more than just a tale of tragedy. It was a testament to the enduring spirit of those who had perished and the compassion of those willing to remember and honor them. Years later, I often find myself gazing at the Appalachian peaks, the memories of that winter night etched into my mind. The whispers of the lost souls linger in my thoughts, a reminder that even in the vastness of the wilderness, the echoes of the past can guide us towards healing and understanding. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind carries the faint sound of footsteps and the distant glow of a lantern, I think of the headless hunter and his companions. Their stories remain a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the power of empathy to bridge that divide. In the heart of the Appalachians, amidst the snow-covered trails and silent forests, their spirits continue to watch over the land, their eternal search finally complete. And as long as the mountains stand tall, their whispers will echo through the ages, a haunting melody of loss, hope, and the enduring bonds that transcend even death itself. Story number 2. Whispers Through the Snow. Moving to Minnesota was supposed to be a fresh start for us. After years of the relentless pace in Chicago, my wife, Laura, and I craved the serenity that only a small town could offer. When we found the old house nestled in the quiet outskirts of Frostwood, surrounded by acres of untouched snow and towering pines, it felt like the perfect refuge. Little did we know, the house held secrets that would unravel our lives in the most terrifying ways. The house itself was a grand, albeit dilapidated, Victorian structure. Its once vibrant red paint had faded to a ghostly white, and the windows, though intact, were shrouded in grime, giving it an almost spectral appearance against the winter landscape. The local realtor had mentioned its history briefly. The Caldwell family had lived there until a tragic night 50 years ago, but details were scarce. We dismissed it as typical old house lore, eager to make it our own. The first few weeks were blissfully quiet. Laura and I spent our days restoring the house, breathing life back into its creaky floors and dusty rooms. We relished the peaceful evenings by the fireplace, the only sounds being the crackling of the fire and the occasional howl of the winter wind outside. The children, Emma and Jack, were thrilled with their new rooms and the endless adventures the snowy backyard provided. But as the nights grew longer and the snow deeper, subtle changes began to unsettle us. It started with faint sounds, soft footsteps echoing across the snow-covered yard outside our windows. At first, we thought it was just the wind playing tricks on our ears, but the sounds became more distinct, more deliberate. Laura mentioned hearing footsteps during her nightly walks to the bathroom, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. One particularly cold night, the disturbances escalated. As I lay in bed, the silence of the house was abruptly broken by a loud thud from the kitchen. My heart pounded as I reached for my flashlight and crept downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but the window was slightly ajar, the snowstorm outside making it impossible to see anything. I closed the window firmly, my mind racing with questions but finding no answers. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I began researching the house's history. The local library had minimal records, but I managed to find an old newspaper clipping about the Caldwell family tragedy. 50 years ago, the patriarch, Thomas Caldwell, had killed his wife and 2 children on a frigid winter night. The motive was never clear, with theories ranging from financial despair during the Great Depression to psychological breakdowns. Thomas was never seen again after the incident, and the house stood abandoned until we purchased it. As I delved deeper, the connection between the past and our present grew undeniable. The footsteps, the eerie presence. We were living in a place saturated with unresolved grief and unimaginable horror. Laura, ever the skeptic, initially brushed off my concerns, attributing them to the stress of moving and adjusting to a new environment. But as the occurrences intensified, her skepticism waned, replaced by fear and uncertainty. One night, the haunting reached its peak. The children were asleep. Laura and I were upstairs, and the storm outside raged with unprecedented ferocity. The power flickered, plunging the house into darkness before the emergency generators kicked in. In the midst of the chaos, a piercing scream echoed through the halls, freezing the blood in my veins. It was a child's cry, filled with pain and terror, coming from the direction of the basement. Without thinking, I grabbed a flashlight and descended the narrow staircase. The basement was a relic of the past, filled with old furniture covered in white sheets and boxes of forgotten belongings. The scream had stopped, but the oppressive silence weighed heavily on me. As I reached the bottom step, the temperature seemed to drop even further, my breath visible in the beam of the flashlight. Suddenly, the door to the basement slammed shut above me, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged as I pounded on the door, shouting for Laura, who stood helplessly at the top, unable to open it. The flashlight flickered, and in the brief moments of light, I saw something, an apparition standing at the far end of the basement. It was Thomas Caldwell, his face twisted in anguish, holding a blood-stained object that glinted ominously in the light. Before I could react, the spirit lunged towards me, and I felt an invisible force pulling me deeper into the basement. The air grew thick with sorrow and rage, the cries of the lost family echoing around me. I struggled, trying to break free, but the grip of the past was relentless. The vision shifted, and I saw flashes of that fateful night, the snowstorm, the desperate father, the lifeless bodies, and the moment of the unspeakable act. With a final surge of adrenaline, I managed to wrench myself free, stumbling back up the stairs. The basement door flew open, and I tumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. Laura rushed to my side, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. We didn't speak for a long time, the weight of what we had witnessed hanging between us. Determined to protect our family, we decided to confront the lingering spirits. That evening, we gathered the children and sat them down, sharing the tragic history of the house. Together, we performed a simple ritual of remembrance, lighting candles, saying prayers, and acknowledging the pain that had been left unresolved. It was a small gesture, but it felt necessary, a way to offer peace to the restless souls that haunted our home. In the weeks that followed, the disturbances began to subside. The footsteps became less frequent, and the oppressive presence that had weighed us down lifted. The scream never returned, and the house felt warmer, lighter. It was as if the act of confronting the past had allowed the spirits to find closure, freeing them from their eternal torment. Yet, even with the calm restored, the memory of that night lingered. The children spoke of dreams where they saw their parents smiling, free from the shadows that once haunted the house. Laura and I found a deeper connection, our shared experience strengthening our bond and reminding us of the importance of facing the darkness together. One snowy evening, as we sat by the fireplace, the wind howling outside, I glanced out the window. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure walking across the yard, a lantern in hand. My heart skipped a beat, but the figure was gone almost instantly, swallowed by the swirling snow. I turned to Laura, who met my gaze with a knowing smile. We understood that some spirits may still wander, but now we were ready to coexist peacefully, honoring the past while embracing our present. Living in the old house in Minnesota had taught us that the past never truly dies. It lingers, waiting to be acknowledged and understood. By facing the horror head-on, we had not only freed the spirits that once haunted us but also found the strength to heal our own wounds. The house, once a place of tragedy, became our sanctuary, a testament to the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and the resilience of the human spirit. As the years passed, Frostwood became our home. The memories of that winter night etched into the very fabric of our lives. The house stood as a silent guardian of its history, its walls whispering tales of sorrow and redemption to those who dared to listen. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the snow falls thick and the wind sings a mournful tune, I catch a glimpse of the lantern's glow in the distance, a reminder that even in death, hope can guide us through the darkest of storms. Story number 3. The Lantern Walker of Laurel Highlands. I've always been fascinated by the stories that linger in the shadows of small towns. Those eerie legends passed down through generations. Laurel Highlands, Pennsylvania, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, is no exception. As a freelance journalist with a penchant for the supernatural, I found myself irresistibly drawn to its whispered tales, especially one that sent chills down my spine: the legend of the Headless Man of Laurel Highlands. It was a crisp November evening when I arrived in town, my car crunching over the gravel driveway of the old inn that served as my temporary residence. The innkeeper, a stout woman named Margaret, welcomed me with a warm smile, oblivious to the darkness that awaited me. "You must be the writer," she said, handing me a room key. "We don't get many visitors this time of year." "Thanks, Margaret. I'm here to delve into the local legends," I replied, settling into my room adorned with antique furnishings and thick, woolen drapes. After unpacking, I decided to explore the town, eager to soak in its atmosphere and perhaps uncover the truth behind the Headless Man. As night began to fall, the temperature dropped, and a dense fog rolled in from the surrounding woods, cloaking the streets in an eerie stillness. I made my way to the town's historical society, a modest building filled with dusty books and faded photographs. Inside, I met Tom, an elderly historian with a wealth of knowledge about Laurel Highlands' past. "You're here about the Headless Man, aren't you?" Tom asked, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Yes," I replied. "Can you tell me more about him?" Tom leaned in, lowering his voice. "It was over 50 years ago, during a particularly brutal winter. A man named Henry Caldwell was driving his snowmobile along the old county road, one that winds through these hills. A sudden blizzard hit. Visibility dropped to zero. Henry lost control, and his snowmobile careened off the path, plunging into the ravine below. He didn't survive the crash, lost his head to the unforgiving ice and snow." I listened intently, the story sending a shiver down my spine. "And the legend says his spirit still roams these roads?" Tom nodded solemnly. "Every winter night, especially during heavy snowfalls, locals report seeing a man walking the old road, lantern in hand, searching for his missing head. Some say his cries echo through the night, a haunting reminder of that tragic accident." Intrigued and unsettled, I thanked Tom and left the historical society, my mind racing with thoughts of the spectral figure. Determined to uncover more, I decided to visit the crash site the following day, despite warnings from the townsfolk to stay away. The next morning, the sun struggled to penetrate the thick cloud cover, casting a gloomy pall over the landscape. I donned my warmest clothes and set out towards the old county road, the one now mostly overgrown and forgotten. As I trekked through the snow-covered path, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of my boots and the distant call of a lone owl. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow. After an hour's hike, I reached the ravine where Henry Caldwell met his untimely end. The area was eerily still, the remnants of the snowmobile barely visible beneath the snow. I sat down, taking out my notebook, and began jotting down observations, the weight of the legend pressing down on me. As dusk approached, I decided to wait for nightfall, hoping to witness the apparition myself. The temperature plummeted, and the first flakes of snow began to fall, light and silent at first, then growing in intensity. Night enveloped the ravine, the darkness almost tangible. I felt a presence, an inexplicable sense of being watched. The wind howled through the trees, and the snowstorm intensified, swirling around me in a frenzied dance. Suddenly, a soft glow appeared in the distance, a faint light bobbing along the old county road. My heart raced as I strained my eyes to make out the figure. There it was, a man, tall and imposing, walking slowly down the path. He held a lantern that cast an otherworldly glow, illuminating his form against the whiteout. But something was horribly wrong. The man had no head. Where his neck should have been was an empty void, the snowstorm concealing any remnants. He moved with purpose, his lantern swinging gently, searching, yearning. I froze, unable to tear my gaze away. The air grew colder, each breath visible in the frigid night. The man paused, turning his body slightly as if sensing my presence. I dared not move, fearing that any sudden action might provoke him. Then, a sound pierced the silence, a mournful wail, the sound of a child crying. It echoed through the ravine, blending with the howling wind. The headless man continued his trek, the cries growing louder, more desperate. Summoning my courage, I reached for my camera, hoping to capture evidence of the apparition. As I raised it, the man stopped, his lantern's light flickering. He turned directly towards me, and despite his headless state, his eyes seemed to burn with an intense sorrow. "Help me." The voice was a hollow whisper, carried by the wind. "Find my head." A surge of empathy washed over me. Henry Caldwell had been a father, perhaps driven to desperation by circumstances beyond his control. The legend wasn't just about a ghost. It was about a man lost to tragedy, seeking closure. I replied softly, "I'll help you, I promise." The headless man nodded, his form beginning to fade into the swirling snow. "Thank you," he murmured, and with that, he disappeared, leaving me alone in the storm. The cries of the child lingered, haunting me as I made my way back to town. The encounter left an indelible mark on my soul, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Determined to honor Henry Caldwell's memory, I spent the following weeks delving deeper into the case. I interviewed locals, scoured old newspaper archives, and even consulted with paranormal experts. What I uncovered was a tale of love, loss, and the harsh realities of life during the Great Depression. Henry and his wife, Clara, had struggled to make ends meet, their farm failing despite relentless effort. The winter that took Henry's life was one of the coldest on record, pushing the community to its limits. Desperate to survive, Clara had made the heartbreaking decision to abandon hope, a decision that culminated in the tragic accident. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the ravine, this time with the intention of laying Henry's spirit to rest. On a moonlit night, I placed a small lantern at the crash site, its warm light a symbol of hope and remembrance. I spoke words of comfort, acknowledging his pain and offering forgiveness for the circumstances that led to his demise. As I finished, the air seemed to lighten, the oppressive cold easing. The cries of the child softened, replaced by a gentle silence. I felt a presence beside me, a sense of peace that had been missing for over 50 years. The next winter, the legend of the Headless Man of Laurel Highlands took on a new meaning. Locals reported fewer sightings, and those who did see the apparition felt a sense of calm rather than fear. Henry Caldwell's story had been heard, his pain acknowledged, and his spirit finally found solace. Years later, as I sit by the fireplace in my home, I reflect on that transformative experience. Laurel Highlands remains a place of beauty and mystery, its legends now enriched by the truth of a father's love and a community's resilience. The Headless Man no longer roams the old county road in search of his missing head. Instead, his story serves as a testament to the enduring power of compassion and understanding. Sometimes, when the winter winds howl and the snow blankets the land, I imagine Henry walking the path once more, his lantern guiding him towards eternal peace. And in those moments, I'm reminded that even in the darkest of nights, a single act of kindness can illuminate the way forward. Story number 4. whispers beneath the ice. I've always been drawn to legends, those eerie tales that linger in the back of your mind long after the night has passed. Growing up near Lake Michigan, I was no stranger to the stories locals whispered about the frozen expanse each winter. But none haunted me quite like the legend of the crying child beneath the ice. It was the winter of 2023, one of the coldest I could remember. The lake had transformed into a vast, shimmering sheet of ice, stretching as far as the eye could see. The air was biting, each breath a visible reminder of the frigid temperatures. I decided to spend the season in my family's old cabin on the lake's edge, hoping the isolation would provide the perfect environment for writing my next novel. Little did I know, the legends of Lake Michigan were about to become my reality. The first few weeks were peaceful. I reveled in the silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the cabin or the distant howl of the wind. But as December deepened, the nights grew longer and the stories more persistent. The legend spoke of a desperate couple during the Great Depression, unable to provide for their child, who tragically ended up throwing their baby into the icy waters. It was said that on the coldest nights, the child's cries could be heard echoing from beneath the ice, a sorrowful lament that chilled even the hardiest souls. At first, I dismissed it as mere folklore, a product of desperate times and desperate minds. But the stories grew more vivid, more personal. Neighbors shared accounts of hearing the cries, of seeing a small figure wandering the frozen shoreline, searching for something lost. One night, fueled by a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, I decided to investigate. I bundled up in my thickest coat, gloves, and a woolen hat, and trudged out onto the ice. The moon was a thin crescent, its light barely penetrating the heavy cloud cover. Each step I took was deliberate, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The lake was eerily silent, the only sound the distant drip of melting ice and the soft whisper of the wind. As I walked, memories of the legends swirled in my mind. I imagined the desperate parents, the cold night, the tragic decision. The weight of their sorrow seemed to press down on me, making the air feel heavier with each passing moment. I reached the spot described in the stories, a secluded area where the ice was thickest, a place where the cries were said to be the loudest. I paused, scanning the frozen expanse for any sign of movement. The moonlight danced on the ice, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. Then, faintly at first, I heard it, a soft, plaintive crying that seemed to come from all around me. My heart raced, each beat louder in my ears. I strained to listen, trying to discern the source. The cries grew louder, more insistent, a heartbreaking melody that tugged at my soul. I felt a chill that wasn't entirely due to the cold, a sense of sorrow and longing that seemed to emanate from the very ice beneath my feet. I took a step forward, then another, unable to tear myself away from the haunting sound. As I moved closer to the center of the lake, the cries intensified, now accompanied by the faint sound of footsteps crunching in the snow. I turned, expecting to see another soul braving the cold. But there was no one. The footprints led to a small clearing where the ice was perfectly still, unmarred by wind or footsteps. It was there that I saw her, a young girl, no older than 7 or 8, her transparent form shimmering in the moonlight. She stood on the ice, her eyes hollow and filled with an endless sadness. Her small hands were outstretched, as if reaching for something or someone beyond the frozen barrier. Her dress was old-fashioned, reminiscent of the 1930s, the fabric torn and worn. The cries emanating from her seemed to pierce the very core of my being, a plea for help that transcended time and space. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. I felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to comfort her, but something held me back. Fear gripped me, a primal instinct warning me to flee, but my feet remained rooted to the spot, eyes locked on her ethereal form. "Why are you crying?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. She looked down at me, her eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to stretch into eternity. "I can't find my way back," she replied. her voice echoing across the frozen lake. I wanted to respond, to offer solace, but the words caught in my throat. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The legends were true. The cries were not just tales of old. They were a living, breathing sorrow that haunted the ice each winter. As I stood there, entranced by her plight, the temperature seemed to drop even further. My breath came in shallow gasps, each exhale a visible reminder of the cold that now felt suffocating. The girl began to fade, her form becoming less distinct, the sorrow in her eyes deepening. "Help me find peace," she pleaded, her voice growing fainter. "I'm lost." Desperation surged through me. I took a hesitant step forward, my hand reaching out as if to bridge the gap between our worlds. But as my fingers grazed the edge of the ice, a sharp pain shot through my hand, forcing me to recoil. The ice beneath me cracked, a sinister reminder of the thin barrier between the living and the dead. The girl let out a final, heart-wrenching cry before vanishing into the night, leaving me alone on the frozen lake, the echoes of her sorrow lingering in the air. I stumbled back to the shore, my body numb and my mind reeling from the encounter. The legends were no longer just stories. They were a painful reality that had touched me in a way I couldn't fully comprehend. In the days that followed, I struggled to process what I had experienced. The cries of the child haunted my dreams, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded beneath the ice. I delved into the history of the area, uncovering old newspaper clippings and faded photographs that chronicled the story of the desperate couple and their lost child during the Great Depression. The details were sparse, but the essence of their sorrow was unmistakable. Determined to honor her memory and help ease her lingering pain, I began to write. My novel took shape as a tribute to the girl, weaving her story into a narrative that explored the depths of grief, loss, and the longing for redemption. Each word I penned felt like a step toward healing, not just for her but for myself as well. As winter began to wane and the ice started to thaw, the cries of the child grew quieter, replaced by the gentle lapping of melting waters against the shore. It was as if she had found the peace she so desperately sought, her sorrow finally lifted by the acknowledgement and understanding of her tragic fate. Years have passed since that fateful winter, and I continue to visit the old cabin each season, a silent guardian of the lake's deepest secrets. The legend of the crying child beneath Lake Michigan remains a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of love and loss. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind whispers through the trees, I swear I can still hear her faint cries, a haunting melody that echoes across the frozen expanse, reminding me that some stories never truly fade. Story number 5. Whispers on Bennington Triangle. I've always been a night owl. There's something about the solitude of the open road under a blanket of darkness that speaks to me. Maybe it's the hum of the engine, the rhythmic thumping of the tires against the asphalt, or the way the stars seem to watch over me as I navigate the endless stretches of highway. But nothing could have prepared me for that night on the Bennington Triangle in Vermont, a place shrouded in mystery and haunted by whispers of the past. It was late December, and Vermont was experiencing one of its harshest winters in years. The snow fell relentlessly, turning the landscape into a monochrome expanse of white. I was hauling freight from Burlington to Boston, a route I'd taken countless times. But the weather that night was different. The storm was fiercer than usual, with winds howling like the spirits of the damned and visibility reduced to mere feet ahead of my cab. Bennington Triangle, a name that sent chills down the spines of locals and adventurers alike. The area between Manchester, Brattleboro, and Newfane had a reputation for mysterious disappearances, strange lights, and unexplained phenomena. As a truck driver, I'd heard the stories, but I'd always dismissed them as mere folklore spun by those who spent too much time alone in the wilderness. But that night, as I trudged through the knee-deep snow, the legends seemed more real than ever. I was approaching the infamous triangle around midnight. The road was barely visible, obscured by the blinding snowfall and the thick fog that clung to the mountainside. My headlights pierced through the whiteout, casting eerie shadows that danced and twisted with each gust of wind. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the cold seeped into my bones, making it hard to keep my eyes open. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, a figure standing by the roadside, her silhouette barely discernible against the swirling snow. She was dressed in a long, dark coat that billowed slightly in the wind, her hair hidden beneath a heavy hood. Her posture was unnaturally still, and she held out her arms, as if waving me over. At first, I thought it was another motorist in need of help, but something about her presence felt off. Maybe it was the way she stood there, motionless and silent, or the way the snow seemed to cling to her like a shroud. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield to get a better look. "Hello," I called out, my voice wavering slightly from the cold and the unease settling in my gut. She didn't respond. Instead, she continued to stand there, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I felt an inexplicable urge to stop, to offer assistance, but logic and caution warred within me. The storm was getting worse, and the road ahead was treacherous. I debated whether to continue driving or to pull over and investigate. My rational mind insisted it was better to stay on the road, to avoid any unnecessary risks, especially in such severe weather conditions. But something held me back, a strange compulsion that made me veer slightly off the main path and slow down to a crawl. As I did, the woman remained where she was, her presence unwavering. I rolled down my window, the cold air biting into my skin as I called out again. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, she vanished. 1 second she was there, and the next, she was gone, as if swallowed by the snowstorm itself. My heart raced, and a chill ran down my spine. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping fear, and decided to continue driving. As I pressed the accelerator, the snow seemed to intensify, the flakes larger and more relentless than before. Visibility was nearly zero, and my headlights barely cut through the downpour. The road ahead twisted and turned, leading deeper into the heart of the Bennington Triangle. My GPS was useless in these conditions, and I relied solely on memory and intuition to navigate the treacherous path. Suddenly, my truck hit a patch of ice, causing me to lose control. The vehicle skidded wildly, tires squealing against the frozen pavement before careening off the road and into a ditch. The impact jolted me awake, my head throbbing and my body aching from the abrupt stop. I groaned, attempting to assess the damage. Miraculously, the truck was still intact, though it had come to a rest on its side, partially embedded in the snow. I unbuckled my seatbelt and tried to open the door, but it was stuck. Panic set in as I realized I might be trapped. The storm showed no signs of abating, and the biting cold was now a relentless torment. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but my voice was lost in the howling wind. Minutes felt like hours as I struggled to free myself. Finally, with a mighty heave, the door gave way, and I stumbled out into the storm. The world around me was a blur of white, and the darkness pressed in from all sides. I fumbled for my phone, but it was dead, likely a casualty of the harsh conditions. Desperation took hold as I realized I was alone, miles away from any signs of civilization. I knew I needed to find shelter or a way to signal for help, but the storm was unforgiving, and the landscape seemed endless. As I trudged through the snow, the memories of the woman by the roadside resurfaced. Had she been real, or just a figment of my imagination fueled by fear and isolation? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes followed my every step. Hours passed, and my energy waned. The cold was becoming unbearable, my fingers numb and my teeth chattering uncontrollably. I stumbled upon a small clearing and, to my relief, saw the faint glow of a cabin in the distance. Summoning the last of my strength, I made my way toward it, praying it wasn't another trap set by the malevolent spirits rumored to haunt the triangle. As I approached, the outline of the cabin became clearer, its windows emitting a warm, inviting light. I knocked on the door, hoping for sanctuary from the relentless storm. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with a kind face and tired eyes. "Please, I need shelter," pleaded, shivering uncontrollably. The man nodded and ushered me inside. The interior was cozy, with a roaring fireplace and simple furnishings. He introduced himself as George, a hermit who had chosen a life of solitude in the wilderness. Grateful for the refuge, I settled by the fire, trying to warm myself and make sense of the night's terrifying events. We talked for a while, and I shared my story, the apparition, the accident, and the relentless storm. George listened intently, his expression growing somber. "You saw her, didn't you?" he said quietly. "Mary Sullivan." I frowned, confused. "Mary Sullivan? Who's that?" George sighed, his eyes distant. "She's the spirit that haunts this area. Years ago, during a particularly brutal winter, Mary was traveling home when her car got stuck in the snow. She tried to flag down help, just like you did, but she never made it back. Locals say her ghost still roams the Bennington Triangle, seeking assistance that never comes." A chill ran down my spine. "So, I wasn't imagining things." He shook his head. "No, son. Many have seen her, especially during the worst of storms. She's trapped here, reliving her final moments, hoping someone will save her." I felt a pang of sympathy for the lost soul, but fear still gnawed at me. "Is there anything I can do to help her?" George looked thoughtful. "Some say acknowledging her presence and offering a prayer can ease her restless spirit. Others believe leaving a token of kindness might help her move on. It's not guaranteed, but it might offer her some peace." I nodded, determined to do whatever I could. That night, as George slept and the storm raged outside, I took a moment to reflect. I pulled out a small flashlight and a photo of my family, my talisman against the cold and darkness. With trembling hands, I stepped outside and made my way back to the spot where I'd seen Mary. The storm had subsided slightly, but the snow still fell heavily around me. I stood by the roadside, holding the photo up to the sky. "Mary," I called softly, "I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm here to help." For a moment, there was silence. Then, a faint glow appeared in the distance, and I saw her, Mary Sullivan, standing just a few feet away, her ethereal form shimmering in the moonlight. Her eyes met mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like the soft rustling of leaves. "I can finally rest." As her figure began to fade, I felt a warmth envelop me, a stark contrast to the biting cold. The oppressive weight that had burdened the Bennington Triangle seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of tranquility. Mary Sullivan was gone, her spirit finally at peace. I returned to the cabin, my heart lighter despite the exhaustion. George greeted me with a knowing smile. "She's free now," he said. "Sometimes, all it takes is a little compassion to break the cycle." The rest of my journey was uneventful, the road now clear and the storm abated. As I drove away from the Bennington Triangle, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection to the place and its haunted history. The experience had changed me, instilling a newfound respect for the unseen and the stories that linger long after the snow has melted. Back in civilization, I shared my story with others, hoping to honor Mary's memory and perhaps help those who might encounter her in the future. The Bennington Triangle remains a place of mystery, its legends growing with each passing year. But now, I know that amidst the snow-covered roads and whispering winds, there lies a tale of loss, hope, and the enduring power of human kindness. Sometimes, when I'm driving alone on a cold winter night, I glance at the dark stretch of highway where Mary first appeared. And in those moments, I remember that even in the bleakest of places, a simple act of compassion can bring light to the darkest of nights. Story number 6. Bigfoot in Colorado. The Colorado Rockies have always held a special place in my heart. Their rugged beauty, the crisp mountain air, and the sense of isolation they offer. It's the perfect backdrop for solitude and reflection. But that winter night, amidst the relentless snowfall, the mountains revealed a darkness I never anticipated. I had joined a group of friends for a weekend climbing trip, eager to escape the chaos of city life and immerse myself in nature's embrace. Our group consisted of 5: Emily, the ever-enthusiastic planner; Jake, the seasoned climber with countless expeditions under his belt; Sarah, the wildlife photographer; Mike, the jokester who could lighten any tense moment; and me, Alex, the writer seeking inspiration from the wilderness. We arrived at our base camp on a Friday afternoon, setting up our tents and organizing our gear. The first day was filled with laughter, shared stories, and the thrill of conquering challenging trails. As night fell, we gathered around a campfire, the flames flickering against the encroaching darkness. Emily had brought along some local lore to share, tales passed down through generations of Colorado mountaineers. "Have you guys heard about the Bigfoot sightings around here?" Emily asked, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Jake chuckled. "You mean the mythical giant ape? I've heard stories, but I don't put much stock in them." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "There have been numerous reports, especially during heavy snowfalls. Some say they hear massive footsteps and eerie howls echoing through the night." Mike grinned. "Sounds like the perfect setup for a ghost story. Maybe we'll encounter one tonight." We all laughed. But as the night deepened and the fire's warmth faded, an uneasy silence settled over us. The wind howled through the pines, and the snowflakes danced violently in the air, obscuring our view of the surrounding wilderness. Around midnight, the tranquility was shattered by a deep, resonant thud. It echoed through the forest, a sound unlike anything we had heard before. Jake was the first to react, grabbing his flashlight and motioning for the rest of us to follow. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice tense. "Let's see what's making that noise." We trudged through the knee-deep snow, the beam of Jake's flashlight cutting through the darkness. As we moved deeper into the woods, another set of footsteps emerged, massive, deliberate, and unmistakably bipedal. My heart pounded in my chest as the realization hit us. This was no ordinary animal. Emily clutched my arm, her face pale. "Do you think it's Bigfoot?" Before Jake could respond, a low, guttural growl resonated from the shadows. The sound was both terrifying and mesmerizing, sending chills down our spines. We froze, every sense heightened, trying to locate the source of the noise. Then, out of the darkness, emerged a figure of immense stature, standing over 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a muscular frame. It was covered in thick, matted fur that blended seamlessly with the snowy landscape. Its eyes glowed faintly in the flashlight's beam, reflecting an intelligence that was both unsettling and sorrowful. Mike, ever the brave one, took a step forward. "Hey there, buddy. We're not here to hurt you." The creature paused, tilting its head as if trying to understand us. For a moment, there was a semblance of peace, a fragile connection between humans and the unknown. But the fragile calm was shattered when the creature let out a piercing scream, a sound filled with anguish and rage. Panic set in. We turned to flee, but the snowstorm had intensified, reducing visibility to mere feet. The creature moved with alarming speed, its footsteps causing the ground to tremble. We sprinted through the blinding snow, branches whipping against our faces, hearts racing. Behind us, the howls grew louder, a cacophony of despair and fury. Emily stumbled, falling into the snow, her camera slipping from her grasp. Jake reached out to help her, but the creature was upon us, its massive hands reaching out, trying to grasp us in its powerful grip. "Run!" Jake shouted, pulling us along. "Don't look back." We didn't dare glance over our shoulders, fearing what horrors awaited us. The cold became unbearable, our breaths visible in the frigid air. our limbs numb from the relentless snow. Every step felt like a struggle against an invisible force determined to keep us from escaping. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we broke through the dense forest and stumbled upon a narrow trail leading back to the base camp. Exhausted and terrified, we collapsed near our tents, the storm still raging around us. Silence enveloped us once more, but the memory of those haunting eyes and the creature's mournful cries lingered in our minds. The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a serene, albeit eerie, stillness. We huddled together, processing the night's events. Emily's camera had been found nearby, its lens cracked but still functional. As we reviewed the footage, our worst fears were confirmed. Blurry images of the colossal figure moving through the snow, his presence undeniable. News of our encounter spread quickly, reigniting debates about Bigfoot's existence. Some dismissed it as a hallucination induced by the harsh conditions, while others believed we had stumbled upon a hidden truth of the wilderness. Regardless of the skepticism, we knew what we had seen and what we had heard. In the days that followed, we left Frosthaven with a newfound respect for the mysteries that the mountains hold. The memory of that night remained etched in our minds, a reminder of the thin line between the known and the unknown. Sometimes, in the heart of Colorado's vast wilderness, the legends are not just stories, they are warnings of what lies beyond the veil of our understanding. As I sit here, writing this account, I can't help but feel a lingering sense of unease. The mountains are beautiful, but they harbor secrets that defy explanation. And sometimes, when the snow falls thick and the night is still, I swear I can hear the distant echo of those haunting footsteps and the sorrowful howl of a creature caught between worlds. Story number 7. The Haunted Piano from the Abandoned House in Alaska. I never thought I'd find myself back in Alaska, a land where endless snowfields stretch as far as the eye can see and winter nights are so bitterly cold they seem to freeze time itself. But as a paranormal investigator, unique stories are hard to come by, and the promise of an intriguing case led me to the small, remote village of Frosthaven, a place where mysteries are as common as the biting winds that sweep through its narrow streets. Frosthaven isn't marked on most maps. Only the locals know its exact location. This village has stood the test of time, seemingly untouched by the passage of years. Yet life here seems to cling stubbornly to the harshness of its environment. Old wooden houses with worn shingles line the main road, each one bearing the scars of countless winters. But amidst these dwellings stands one house that stands out, a two-story relic that has been abandoned for years. The residents of Frosthaven are well aware of this house. They call it the Piano House. And local legend has it that on cold winter nights, the haunting melodies of a piano can be heard emanating from within, despite no one daring to approach it. These stories about the piano aren't new, but they've grown more mysterious with each passing year. As a paranormal investigator, I couldn't resist the allure of uncovering the truth behind these eerie piano tunes. The locals' tales were too compelling to ignore, and I was determined to discover whether there was something supernatural at play or if these were merely ghost stories spun over time. Upon arriving in Frosthaven, the cold immediately seeped into every nook and cranny. Snow-laden trees and the dim light of the winter sun cast an eerie pall over the landscape, making everything appear bleak and lifeless. I rented a small room in a nearby house and began my investigation. On the first day, I delved into the history of the abandoned house. According to old records, the house once belonged to a pianist named Edward Blackwood. Edward was a talented musician, renowned for his beautiful compositions. But his life ended tragically when he disappeared during a fierce snowstorm a decade ago. Since then, the house has remained deserted, and the sound of the piano serves as a chilling reminder of its dark past. That night, I decided to explore the house. The snow fell thickly, blanketing everything in pristine white. The entrance to the house looked ominous, with large wooden doors and shattered window panes. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped inside. The house was old and silent, only disturbed by the wind whistling through gaps in the walls and the creaking of decaying wood. Armed with a flashlight and a recorder, I began to inspect each room. Eventually, I reached the living room, the heart of the mystery. There stood an old piano, covered in dust and delicate snowflakes. Its keys were yellowed with age but still retained their classic beauty. As I approached the piano, an unsettling feeling washed over me. The air grew heavy, and I felt as if someone was watching me from behind. I activated the recorder, hoping to capture any unusual sounds. But everything remained eerily quiet. On the second night, I decided to stay in the house to document any strange occurrences. As darkness enveloped the room, everything began to change. The wind howled louder, windows rattled, and strange noises echoed from various rooms. But the most terrifying sound was the piano once again filling the air with its mournful melodies. This time, the music was clearer, as if played by a real person. My heart raced, but curiosity kept me glued to the piano. I moved closer, and suddenly, the flashlight beam revealed a shadowy figure standing behind the piano. A man dressed in a long cloak, his face obscured by darkness, was playing the keys with an almost supernatural grace. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. The figure turned to face me, and in that instant, I saw eyes filled with pain and despair. A freezing chill enveloped me, and I tried to move, but my body felt paralyzed. The shadowy figure advanced, and the music grew more intense, as if trying to communicate something urgent. Desperate to regain control, I fought against the paralysis, but it was futile. The presence of the restless spirit was overwhelming. All the research I had done on Edward Blackwood suddenly made sense. Edward wasn't just a gifted pianist. His soul was trapped between this world and the next. The snowstorm that took his life had also ensnared his spirit, forcing him to remain in the house, forever playing the piano he loved. That night, I endured experiences beyond explanation. The piano's music no longer felt beautiful, but was instead a manifestation of sorrow and loneliness. I realized that to free Edward's spirit, I needed to help him find peace. The next day, I delved deeper into Edward's life. Conversations with the villagers revealed that Edward had left an unfinished piece of music before his disappearance, a composition that might hold the key to releasing his spirit. I found the sheet music in an old, ornate box in the bedroom of the abandoned house. The pages were yellowed and fragile, the notes intricate yet filled with emotion. Taking the music back to the living room, I felt a sense of hope. With the sheet in hand, I decided to play the unfinished composition on the old piano, believing that completing it might bring peace to Edward's tormented soul. That night, I began to play each note carefully, feeling the weight of Edward's presence in the room. As the music filled the space, a warm energy began to emanate, and I sensed Edward's spirit gradually surrounding me. The atmosphere shifted from oppressive to serene, and the shadowy figure of Edward started to dissolve into a gentle light. When the final note was played, the room was bathed in a soft glow. The haunting melodies ceased, replaced by a profound silence. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, knowing that Edward had finally found the peace he so desperately sought. The abandoned house no longer echoed with the sorrowful tunes of the piano, and the oppressive cold lifted, replaced by the tranquility of a winter night. The next morning, as I prepared to leave Frosthaven, I glanced back at the house with a sense of relief. I had helped a restless spirit find his peace, and the story of the haunted piano had reached its conclusion. My time in Frosthaven left a lasting impression, prompting deep reflections on life, death, music, and the eternal nature of the human soul. No matter where I go, the story of the haunted piano in the abandoned house in Alaska will remain etched in my heart, a reminder of the power of music and the enduring spirit of those who have passed on.